Welcome to week number 2. I'm glad that you are preparing for the next week's class. Each week I will provide mini lectures that will discuss the basic definitions of economics and the principles that are going to be discussed next week. They should help you get through the chapters and material on Blackboard. But I provide these mini lectures so that when we are in class, we can have a deeper level of discussion than simply reviewing definitions and going over examples. So it's very important that you keep up with each week's lectures and prepare for the next class session that we have. So in this lecture, we will discuss some of the very basic building blocks of economics. And if you've had economics before, this should be a very quick review for you. If you've never had economics before, you will probably recognize these as ideas you've always lived with. You just never realized this is what economists call them. So if you'll remember, economics is not the study of money or the stock market. Economics is the study of the choices that we make. And we make choices because of the concept of scarcity. The reality is every single moment we're having to make some choices because of this concept of scarcity. So scarcity means that we have a limited amount of the resources that we have to work with. It means there's a limited amount. Scarcity has nothing to do with whether you're poor or rich, whether you're male or female, it makes no difference. The reality is all of our resources are limited. We face a limited amount of time. We face a limited amount of money. We face a limited amount of space in our homes. We face a limited amount of food on our plates. Everything that we have is limited, and so we have to make some choices. Now, when we make our choices, we face a very fundamental problem. We have a scarcity of resources, and by resources, I talk about the factors of production: land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. This is at the heart of all economic thought. The challenge we face is we have to decide what to do with these resources. What do we do with the land that we have to work with, the space that we have to work with? What do we do with our time, our labor? What do we do with the machinery and equipment that we have to produce things? What do we do with our intellectual abilities to create profitable businesses and to become entrepreneurs? How do we make these choices? Well, in order to make the choices, we evaluate what's called an opportunity cost. The opportunity cost of something is the value of the next best thing. It's what you would have done if you weren't doing the thing that you're doing right now. So for example, right now you are watching and studying this mini lecture. If you weren't doing that right now, this moment, what would you be doing? Maybe you'd be working. Maybe you'd be taking a nap. Maybe you'd be doing the dishes. What would you be doing? Well, by watching this video, you gave up the opportunity to do that thing. That's your next best alternative. It's what you would have done. So opportunity cost is something that we're going to evaluate when we make our choices. There will always be a trade-off because of scarcity. Scarcity forces us to make these choices because everything is limited. And because everything is limited, there are consequences and there are trade-offs. So when we make our decisions, economists generally believe that we make our decisions based on changes in the situation incrementally. We don't really think of things as all or nothing. We think of things on the margin. We think of our changes in increments. So for example, maybe you're a family that every month you go through 8 gallons of milk a month. Well, I would find it very hard to believe that all of us, knowing that at the end of the month we'll have consumed 8 gallons, will go to the store at the beginning of the month and purchase all 8 gallons. Usually we get a gallon of milk or 2 at a time. Well, what's limiting? Maybe our money is limited. Maybe the space in our refrigerator is limited. And so we have to evaluate. Well, do I get 1 gallon of milk this week or do I get 2 gallons of milk this week? Do I have space? Do I have the money? And if I do get 2 gallons of milk, well, what's the trade-off? Maybe the trade-off is I have to clean out some of the old leftovers from the fridge to make room. But we don't ever say at the beginning of the month, I'm going to purchase all 8 gallons. Maybe you do if you have a big refrigerator, but most of us probably just get a gallon of milk at a time. So when we think of our choices, we tend to think on the margin, from one level to the next level. So we're going to take these concepts and apply them to the idea of production possibilities, which simply describes the possible combinations of things that you could do with the resources that you have available. So for example, and this is hypothetical, let's say in the United States, they have resources to produce industrial goods or technological services. If everybody is on the technology side, the best we could do is 8,000 hours of services per day. And since everybody's doing services, nobody's on the goods side, so that means there are no industrial goods that are made. That's a possible outcome, could be done. Another choice maybe is we mix it up a little, and maybe we do 7,000 hours of services, freeing up some resources to do 4 million trucks of goods per day. That's another possible choice that we could make. Or we could just produce goods, and we have enough resources to possibly produce 10 million truckloads of goods each day, but then that means there won't be any services provided. So what I've listed here are 4 possible hypothetical combinations of ways that a country could divide up their resources. If we were to graph these 4 points, we would graph them as points on a graph. And if you're not familiar with graphs, essentially you have 2 number lines. You'll notice I have a services number line and a goods number line. So for example, the first point says 8,000 hours of services per day. So I find the 8 on the services number line and the 0 on the goods number line, and where they intersect, that's a point. If I were to produce 7 and 4, I find the 7 on the services, and I find the 4 on the goods, and sort of where they intersect, that's where I get another point. Or I can have 8 and 4, so I find the 4 on the services, I find the 8 on the goods, and I get another point. So when I connect all those points together, I get what's called a production possibility frontier. This country has enough resources to produce any point on that frontier. Any point on that frontier could be produced with the resources that this country has. Now, if this country were to decide to only produce 2 million goods, 2 million truckloads of goods per day, and 4,000 hours of services per day, it's possible we could do that, but we could do a whole lot more. And so if we're under the frontier, we're actually not using up our resources. We're inefficient. We have resources left over that could be done to produce more. On the other hand, if we wanted to produce 10 of each, we don't have enough resources to do 10 of each. If we were to produce 10 million truckloads of goods per day, we have nothing left over to produce services. So a point that outside the frontier is unattainable. We can't do it. unless we get what's called economic growth. So economic growth is when you can produce outside that frontier. It's as though the whole frontier shifts outwards, allowing you to produce possibly more of everything. So how do we get economic growth? We could get it by acquiring more technology. So, for example, maybe we somehow acquire more capital resources, more factories, more computers, more things that we can use to make better use of the time that we have. More technology would allow us to get economic growth. Or we could get more resources. More resources would allow us to produce more than what we're currently doing. So for example, more land, more labor, more capital, more entrepreneurship. Those would allow us to get more economic growth. So what we've studied is that economics is the study of our choices, and we make those choices because of the issue of scarcity, a limited amount of the resources that we face. When we make those choices, we evaluate our opportunity cost. And that's the value of the next best thing. It's what you would have done. And our choices are made incrementally on the margin. And we use the production possibilities frontier as a way to illustrate the combination of choices that we can do with the resources that we have available. So in the next chapter, we'll begin to examine some of the measures of our macroeconomies, the things that we use to describe a country's economy, and we'll also begin to examine some groupings of countries as to how advanced or lesser developed those countries might be. The measures of macroeconomics is one way that we can look at our levels of advancement.